as well. Miranda was a traditionalist. He was, in a strange kind of way, he was sort of did what he was told. As far as the pecking order, he's not a guy that would gripe. He wasn't just a wheeler and dealer, but he was a deadly guy. And his closeness to Vito Genovese would help him along the way. Genovese would make Miranda the consigliere of the crime family. Now, Tommy Eboli, he began his career as a boxer and would eventually move into the bootlegging business during Prohibition, working for Lucky Luciano. It was through Luciano that he ends up meeting Vito Genovese, and Vito brings him into the fold by hiring him as a collector, a driver, and a bodyguard. He wasn't just good with his hands, but he had a hell of a violent fucking temper. And that being said, Eboli was Genovese's sort of go-to guy for murder, at least 20 times on record. During the 1930s and 40s, he became a very crooked boxing manager. One of his first manager duties was to manage Vincent the Chin Gigante. As you know, Vinnie the Chin Gigante was a boxer. And just to show you how nutty this fuck was, on January 11th of 1952, the wheels fell off the normal wagon. Boxing in those days and still today long has been completely fixed in a lot of different situations. Maybe not as fixed as it is, today as it was in the old days, but it's still, the mob still has their hands in it. But boxing in those days was completely fixed in many cases. Either the boxers were paid off or the referee was. It's just how things operated. And on this particular night, good old Tommy went absolutely fucking batshit crazy. Like I said, Eboli at the time was managing a couple of different boxers, but he was managing a middleweight by the name of Rocky Castellani, who was fighting Ernie Durando. Durando ended up knocking Castellani down in the 6th and the 7th round, but the referee, Ray Miller, stopped the fight. And he awards a technical knockout to Durando. Eboli was absolutely, completely beside himself, couldn't believe what he was seeing. He jumps into the ring, goes to the ropes, and begins to beat the shit out of the referee. He would end up knocking the referee unconscious. Then he gets into the locker room, and he's not done. He found the boxing promoter who was responsible for the fight, a guy by the name of Al Weil, and he grabs him by his tie and begins to strangle him in the locker room, eventually tossing him to the ground, and then begins to stomp his fucking head in. Apparently, Whale, who was paid off by Eboli, didn't get the fucking message. According to a source of mine, Whale had a better offer. Rather than fixing it the way that Tommy wanted it, he had a better offer, more money, and he took that, and that sent Tommy Eboli into a bit of a temper tantrum, to say the least. Whale would end up calling the police, and Eboli would get arrested for this, indicted for assault. He would plead guilty, do 60 days in jail, and that is the only time he ever spent in prison in his whole entire fucking life. And then because of that, the New York State Athletic Commission would ban him for life, ending his career in boxing. And he would end up going into the mafia full time and eventually would take over the Greenwich Village crew. Eboli, listen, straight up was a serial killer, and he was a hell of an earner. He owned a lot of nightclubs and a lot of bars in Manhattan. And one of the more popular things that he did own were gay clubs. Carlo Gambino owned a lot as well. So that was a common sort of thing that went on. Eboli would use his power to control the rackets on the Hudson River docks. He also controlled Jet Music Corporation, which supplied jukeboxes all over the city, as well as cigarette vending machine companies. So he was more than capable of running businesses. Now, as far as Philip Benny Squints Lombardo, he got his beginnings in the 116th Street crew as a soldier under Trigger Mike Coppola. The 116th Street crew began in the 1890s under the Morellos, which is what we're talking about today. If you want more information on that, you can go back to the very first episode. The first 2 episodes, we talked specifically about some of that. It was truly the genesis of the Genovese crime family. We have talked, like I said earlier, about the 116th Street crew, the first 2 episodes of this show, but they more or less entered New York and began taking over East Harlem using the Black Hand technique of extortion. One fact that many people may not know is that Trigger Mike was responsible really for ensuring that Lucky Luciano's rackets were taken care of when Luciano went to prison and Genovese took off to Italy. During Prohibition time, he earned his moniker for shooting guys. He wasn't going to agree or disagree. He just would fucking kill you. Some people might, handle a beef, or they might let it simmer. They might let it settle, but not Mike. He'd whack a motherfucker and ask questions later. He was all about taking care of business. So with both Luciano and Genovese gone, he was really responsible for maintaining the Harlem numbers racket, which is bringing in over $1 million a year. Keep in mind the year we're talking about here. He completely would end up taking over the Mason Tenders Local 47 and the Local 13 of the Laborers Union. While Trigger Mike in every sense was a gangster's gangster, his personal life showed probably the true disparity that Coppola had. In 1943, his marriage to his first wife, Doris Lehman, ends up going south. It was sort of kind of a situation where I would assume, she didn't know her place, so to speak. And she overhears Mike talking about whacking a New York Republican Party political activist, a guy by the name of Joe Scotariggio. And it was in response to his opposition to somebody that he was backing by the name of Vito Marcantonio. She was pregnant at the time that she overheard sort of his plot to murder somebody. So somehow word travels, and there was some sort of investigation into the matter. So a day after giving birth, Coppola sent her to sleep with the fishes. And the reason why is because she had threatened to rat him out. So he waits till his kid is born and then whacks her. Doesn't even have a problem. And it prevented her from ever uttering a word about that murder plot. And Coppola had awful timing with wives. Let me tell you, he really picked the wrong fucking ones. In 1960, he's one of 11 people that were banned from Vegas casinos in the Black Book. That same year, his second wife, Anna, files for divorce and begins chirping to authorities. And the next thing you know, she's slated to testify against him in an income tax evasion case that was brought against him because she opened her fucking mouth. Coppola doesn't waste time. He orders her death as well as her beheading. And I would largely assume the brutality of that idea was probably a little bit much, but Anna ends up getting kidnapped and nearly beaten to death and found lifeless on a beach. You would think that would stop her from testifying and going forward, but it doesn't. And in 1961, Coppola gets indicted on 4 counts of tax evasion. There would end up being a mistrial, but he would end up pleading out and would get 4 years. Then Anna does... She robs him of $250,000 and takes off to Europe. She then penned a letter to then Attorney General Robert Kennedy, and she tells him everything about Coppola, the mafia, and what he's up to. And then she did the world a favor, and she ends up killing herself. So that's Coppola had some real problems. So even with Lombardo, allegedly his boss at the time, they would begin to do what the Genovese crime family has always been known to do, and that's using a front boss structure to insulate the actual boss of the crime family. There is a lot of confusion because of this. Some believe it was Lombardo who took over. Some believe it was Eboli. Some say Lombardo was never on the ruling panel, but Miranda was, and it's very confusing. And I think a lot of the reasons for that, and I believe the reasons is because that's what Vito Genovese envisioned when they began the front boss bullshit. It's to confuse people. I think the reality is Eboli takes over as captain of the Greenwich Village crew when Vito Genovese becomes official boss. Officially, when Gino Genovese dies, Eboli became acting boss, Jerry Catena his underboss, and Michael Miranda his consigliere, and Anthony Strollo as Eboli's top go-to guy. Lombardo was not on that panel, and didn't have any say in any of those decisions. Many have misreported that Lombardo took over the family when Genovese died. That is not true. Jerry Catena briefly did, and Lombardo would, but he would not become official acting or front boss until 1969. But that's going to be a subject to argument when we get to that point. So Jerry Catena wouldn't last long as he gets indicted and eventually convicted and sentenced to prison in 1970. This ended up shuffling the family lineup inside the Genovese crime family. It would move Miranda in as boss, Lombardo as underboss, and then they shuffled Eboli in as a front boss. Now, lots of people argue whether Miranda or Lombardo split control or not. I've always believed that Miranda was the boss calling the shots at the time, and there's going to be those that are going to argue against that. And I apologize if any of you are somewhat getting confused. With Eboli as front boss, it was sort of all systems go. I say sort of, because Eboli begins to think that he can take over for himself. We've seen this a million times, and we all know how this ends. For the life of me, and I'm never going to understand this. I mean, especially when you consider Havana, Appalachian, I will never understand why this was even necessary. Maybe Eboli was greedy. Maybe he thought money could force the hands of fate. In any event, he sends word through some people that he wanted a meeting or a word within the Gambino crime family, and he wants to talk to Carlo Gambino. He is requesting $4 million as a loan to establish a new narcotics operation. I wish I knew the reasons why he did it. It seems stupid to me, even sitting here now. But I think the speculation is that he felt if he could broker a huge deal, show he could make a ton of money, I think he thought that that would put him sort of on the map, and it would put him over other bosses, and maybe he could force a takeover by showing his business acumen. But it's really ridiculous, because when you think about it, they already had the shipping lanes, the narcotics lanes already set up. But I think it was just a move to show he could make money. And who does he borrow it from? Carlo Gambino. He gets in good with Gambino. Gambino backs him. All of a sudden, he's the actual boss. So we can sort of see what he's attempting to do. Carlo sent Paul Castellano to deliver the money. And what ends up happening is that Lombardo, not Lombardo, Eboli gets caught. Like right out of the fucking gate, gets pinched. And that's not good news. Because it's not just him, it's half his fucking crew gets pinched. So Paul Castellano comes calling for the money, and weeks later, Eboli didn't have it. I don't got the money, sorry. But there are those, who are going to call a spade, and I'm no different in this case. Allegedly, Gambino didn't like Tommy Eboli, and he wanted to rig it so that Frank Thierry, who was a fierce and ferocious Gambino ally, could be put in that position. It just made things easier and gave someone that Gambino could control in another family. Gambino was always looking to control the commission, and that's what this is all about. So some people say that they think on the back end of this is what was going on. And you have to look at it as like Carlos stacking the deck. So in any event, there are those who believe that Gambino used the narcotics operation to get Eboli pinched. Either way, Carlo didn't get his fucking money, and he orders his death. July 16th of 1972, Eboli is leaving his girlfriend's house in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. He ends up getting into his car. He's just sitting there hanging out. A truck slowly rolls past him and unloaded into a car. Eboli gets hit 5 times in the head and neck. With Eboli out of the way, at least on its appearance, Gambino kind of gets what he wants, as Frank Thierry would end up taking over as acting boss. That mob wannabe journalist, Ed Scarfo, claims that, I don't want to trash Ed a whole lot. He's a piece of shit, but that's besides the point. He takes everybody's articles, can't come up with his own information, but he claims that Tommy Eboli was killed because of the Godfather film, which is the stupidest, most ill-informed fucking nonsense I've ever heard in my fucking life. Listen, he never writes his own stuff. Ask him what happened when Jerry Capisci threatened to fucking sue him. Ask him what happened. He's a rat-loving junkie fuck. He does the rat's bidding. I don't want to trash the guy a whole lot, but that's just how I feel about him. It's just nonsense. So while Carlo gets what he wants and funds Thierry was just a front. By this time, Lombardo had clearly become the boss of the family. Thierry wouldn't last that long either, because in 1981, he would be the first Cosa Nostra boss ever tried and convicted with the government using the RICO laws. But someone else was in the shadows waiting and bidding his time, and that person was Vinnie the Chin Gigante. Gigante was born in the Bronx in 1928. By most accounts, he was a kind but quiet child. He would end up dropping out of high school. He would be introduced to the life through his boxing manager, Tommy Eboli, being put on collection duties for Vito Genovese, who takes a liking to Gigante. While Gigante was racking up a boxing career of 25-4, he was a great boxer. He would also be doing the bidding of Genovese as well. Many have asked why Gigante was so loyal to Genovese, and a part of that was the fact that Genovese had a ton of power and a lot of respect that he did get in the streets at the time. But really, it was Vito Genovese's, not Vito, but it was Vinnie the Chin's mom. She needed a surgery, and it was one of these kind of surgeries where if she didn't get it, she could die. Vinnie the Chin didn't have the money. And Genovese, when he hears about this, takes care of everything financially. Goes to the hospital, pays cash. She makes sure that everything is done. And Gigante, after that, was completely loyal to Genovese. Always was. Before and during his career as a boxer, Gigante couldn't seem to escape law enforcement as he ends up getting arrested 7 times in a relatively short period of time, from selling swag, carrying unlicensed handguns, gambling, bookmaking. Most of the charges that he was accused of would be ended up thrown out of court, but he would end up doing a 60-day stay in jail on a bookmaking charge. So as we know, in 1957, Genovese would ask Gigante to clip Costello. For Gigante, it was just business. I don't think that he had an issue with Costello. I just think it was his loyalty to Vito Genovese, and the job lands on his doorstep, but not at first. Gigante wasn't the first person that was notified about this. Genovese was looking to get a hitter from outside the family, but he worried that somebody might talk. And when Gigante heard Genovese sort of lamenting about this, he stands up and says, "I'll take care of it. I'll do it. Don't go to nobody else." And it's been said that Genovese looked at Gigante like a son and didn't want him to be involved. But Gigante, who swore his allegiance to Genovese, wouldn't hear of anything else. So Genovese ends up handing him the job. On May 2nd of 1957, Gigante would lie in wait for Frank Costello to enter his apartment's foyer. As he did, Gigante called out Frank by his name. Frank turns his head. He sees the muzzle flash, and the bullet would rip through Costello's hat and graze his head. The force would knock Costello to the ground, and Gigante, who was built like a fucking gorilla, exited the apartment foyer. The problem was the doorman recognized Gigante, and obviously Frank Costello did not fucking die. It was the dim-witted hit that likely probably kept Gigante out of prison for the rest of his life. But the doorman was going to be a problem. Genovese would send Gigante out of the state where he lost as much weight as possible so he wouldn't be recognizable. He just wanted to change his appearance so the doorman wouldn't recognize him when he came back. Gigante ultimately would be charged with murder, and a warrant for his arrest would be issued. Months later, a very skinny Vinnie Gigante shows back up, walks into the police station, says, "Hey, I heard you're looking for me." And as the trial went going in 1959, the doorman did point out Gigante as the shooter. And then they put Costello on the stand, and he sat there and said he did not recognize his assailant, and that the man in the courtroom that they were alleging did it was not the man who he saw or the man that fired at him. And it was enough to get Gigante acquitted of murder. After the trial, reporters reported that Gigante walked up to Costello, shook his hand, and thanked him for keeping his mouth shut and not ratting him out. And that's not something that Costello had to do. He really didn't have to do it. He could have easily ratted Gigante out. He could have easily done it. He could have blamed Vito Genovese. He could have taken down a lot of people, but he didn't. He stayed straight to the fucking code. And say what you want about Costello, but through and through, man's man. It was also in 1959 when Gambino, Luciano, Lansky, and Costello began to move against Genovese. It wasn't just Vito that was hit. It was also Gigante. It perhaps was a move to teach both of them a lesson. Gambino, Luciano, Lansky, and Costello designed the plan to take out both of them, believe it or not. That's one thing that we haven't talked about a lot on this show, and that's not something you're going to hear anywhere else because nobody seems to talk about it for whatever reason. Both would be convicted of narcotics trafficking, Vito getting 15 years and Vinnie Gigante getting 7 years. Gigante would be paroled after 5 years, and as he came out, he was promoted to captain, and he was sent to head up the Greenwich Village crew. And so one of the things that I mean by the last thing we said was a lot of people think that it was just Gambino setting up Genovese. It wasn't. It was designed to get Gigante too, and it worked. In 1969, Vito caught himself sort of in Vinny caught himself in a bit of a problem. He was residing part-time in Manhattan and part-time in Old Tappan, New Jersey. Old Tappan police force were pretty much watching him really close within the township. And he didn't need the headaches. So what he does is he attempts to bribe the entire police force. He simply handed them Christmas cards with cash and gets ratted out immediately. He would be charged with attempted bribery. And while that's a joke charge on many levels, Vincent always had a backup plan. This is a guy that always thought everything through. He was 2 steps forward on everything. And this was years in the making. He ends up checking himself into a nut ward some 20 fucking times in a short period of time. He knew that if he appeared to be a fucking nut, and carried on like he was a fucking nut, he thought he could beat the bribery charge, and it might be a useful trick that he could use down the line. So when the trial begins, psychiatrists end up testifying in court. And they testify to the fact that he's a certifiable fucking nut, mentally unfit to stand for any trial. And it wasn't the first time Gigante would beat psychiatrists at their own game. Vinny had paid off Eugene Diamo, who he had used over the years as his personal shrink. He would testify that Gigante suffered from a multitude of mentally debilitating problems like schizophrenia, paranoia, mental disorders, anxiety disorders, which once they occurred, he would need to be hospitalized immediately. So he's already setting up for the future. The Gigante family would also back up these absurd claims that in the early 1960s, he had been diagnosed with mental illness, and that when he was tested for his IQ, his ability for comprehension, that he ranged between a 69 and 72, which made him borderline retarded. I don't like that word, but that's just what the court documents I have say. So a few things happened pretty quick within the Genovese crime family. We know that Eboli gets hit, Cherry gets elevated, then a ruling panel gets installed. That panel would consist of Catania, Lombardo, and Miranda. It wouldn't be, as we said, until 1981 that Thierry would take over as front boss. But in 1980, it was a fucked up year, not just for the Philadelphia Mafia, but for the Genovese crime family. And one thing before we get to 1980, it's long been rumored that even though, according to law enforcement, the Gigante was officially boss not until 1981, it's long been said that Gigante actually took over in 1969 in some capacity. Lombardo was always used by Genovese as a front boss, and in my opinion, I tend to believe that Vinnie the Chin Gigante was the official boss of the Genovese crime family in 1969. That makes a lot of sense to me. You'd be hard-pressed to prove to me otherwise, but I think it's probably just general opinion. So 1980, Angelo Bruno in Philadelphia. Since the beginning of time, it seems like New York has tried to be heavy-handed and control Philadelphia, and that might be the very reason why there's such malcontent between Philadelphia and New York. If we go back to the 40s and 50s when Joe Ida was running Philadelphia, the New York families were attempting to control them even back then. Vito Genovese, as we know, took over the Genovese family in 1956, and Philadelphia was gaining power in New Jersey and within Atlantic City. And this was prior to Atlantic City, having casinos, which didn't get greenlit until 1976. Philadelphia was viewed by other families as being owned by the Genovese crime family. Still to this day, they're represented by the Genovese crime family on the commission, even after the 1956 commission After the 1956 commission meeting, Philadelphia and Detroit got seats on the commission. It marked Philadelphia as an independent crime family free of control from New York. That doesn't mean that they would stop trying to control them. Joe Ida would retire in 59, Polino would step down or be forced down, and Angelo Bruno would be named the boss of Philadelphia. So with Angelo Bruno as new boss, a seat on the commission, in his close friendship with Carlo Gambino, made him very powerful. He would expand his family's business interests into Atlantic City. Then in 1970, he refuses to testify into a hearing into organized crime, and he sat in jail for almost 3 years because of it. As he gets out, he went to Italy for a while and did not come back until 1977. He then would move the Bruno family into labor racketeering, unions, gambling, bookmaking, the numbers rackets, and he took over legitimate companies by strong-arming them. Old school way of doing it. One of Bruno's greatest attributes was only using murder as a last resort. He completely took over Local 54, which is the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees Union, one of the unions that Scarfo would continue to take when he became boss. But they would then move into insurance and welfare fraud. He would then extort bars and restaurants. Everybody was paying. Bruno's mantra was low-risk crimes. Don't get into stupid shit. Low-risk, low-time crimes. It was about getting a piece of everything versus one major score. His only rule is that he wanted none of his men dealing in narcotics, and that was going to be his undoing. 1976, Atlantic City is green-lit, and the New York families saw it as an opportunity for money. Carlo Gambino had passed away before Atlantic City was officially open and running. Had Gambino not died, there are a few things that might not have happened, and we're going to get there in a little bit, but Bruno was asked to kick back to New York because of Atlantic City. They wanted to get involved, or they wanted to kick back, and Bruno basically told them, fuck off. That Atlantic City territory had always belonged to them. It belonged to him. He recognized it as his, and that basically, New York trying to encroach was unacceptable to him. And it also pissed off Funzi Thierry, who was operating, he also pissed off Funzi Thierry, who was operating in New Jersey, and he asked permission from Angelo Bruno to begin operating in Atlantic City, and he told him no. Bruno, while powerful, lost power when Carlo Gambino died. Castellano was not the type of guy who was going to continue on with close personal friendships with people that Carlo was tight with. It was a new regime. Bruno's men sort of begin to get frustrated. One of the issues is that Bruno wouldn't allow his men to sell narcotics, but his men knew that not just Rosario and John Gambino on the behalf of the Gambinos were selling drugs in New Jersey, which Angelo Bruno took a kickback from, but he also allowed Harry Riccobene to sell narcotics and took a cut back from that as well. They saw it as stacking the deck. They saw it as him loading his pockets, and there were those within the family that had enough. But they also thought that they had an ally in Funzi Thierry because he was pissed off as well. Like I said, he was irate that Bruno allowed him to operate in Atlantic City, and it also didn't help that there were indictments that were now coming down on Bruno, so he's fighting it on all fronts. So Angelo Bruno's consigliere, Antonio Caponegro, had his own ideas. Antonio felt that if Bruno wasn't around, that he had enough support to take the family on a new trajectory. Caponegro would end up leaving to New York to visit Funzi Thierry. Thierry and Caponegro didn't exactly have a friendly past. In fact, they wanted to kill one another at one point years prior. Caponegro had controlled a vast numbers racket in Newark, and in turn, he had a vast sort of numbers racket in Newark, and that New York had given parts of turf to Philadelphia and New Jersey. Thierry thought that turf belonged to him because he was in Jersey, and he was irate that Caponegro kept moving to what he considered his turf. Thierry would end up taking his gripe to the commission, and the commission ruled in favor of Caponegro, likely because of the friendship between Gambino and Angelo Bruno. Caponegro would end up winning that fight, and Thierry never ever fucking forgot it. So, as Caponegro goes to see Funzi Thierry, he sort of lays out this idea. He wanted to kill Bruno, and he wanted his backing. Thierry assured Caponegro that when everything went down and the smoke sort of cleared, he would back him on the commission. So Caponegro goes back to Philadelphia and sort of lays out the plans. And in the back of his mind, he thinks he's got not just Thierry's backing, but now commission will go along with it because Thierry is saying it was okay. Caponegro would grab his brother-in-law, Alfred Salerno. He would grab Frank Sindone. He would grab John Simone, and it's widely believed John Stanfa. On March 21st of 1980, Bruno and Stanfa are sitting in a car outside of Bruno's home, just adjacent from 10th and Snyder. Two men dressed in black came from the rear of the car, placing a shotgun directly to the back of Bruno's head and blew his fucking head off. You've seen the photos. Bruno was killed instantly, and somehow John Stanfa's unharmed in the matter and would disappear first to Delaware, then to Maryland, and then the Gambino crime family would hide him in New York. So tell me he wasn't involved in something there. After Bruno was killed, the commission was absolutely fucking furious. Caponegro was summoned to New York immediately. Caponegro then was called before the commission. Funzi Thierry also was at that meeting. As the commission began its sort of official inquiry to what happened, Caponegro explains that he had a meeting with Thierry. Thierry said it was okay, go for it. The commission then looks over at Funzi Thierry, who bluntly lies and says that there was no meeting and he had no prior knowledge of that event and would never ever sanction a hit on a mob boss. At this commission meeting were the heads of the 5 families, which included Vinnie Gigante and Paul Castellano. Castellano would then defer to Gigante, who ordered the death of Caponegro immediately. Caponegro was taken out of the meeting and tortured for days before he was finally killed. On April 18th of 1980, both Caponegro and Salerno were found in the trunk of a car, naked, beaten, and killed. Not long after, the Gambinos would whack Sindone and Simone. We do know that Thierry used Caponegro to advance things. We know he lied. Those are 2 facts that we know. There's been a lot of talk about Vinnie Gigante and that he might or may not have known about the incoming hit on Bruno, and that he sort of closed his eyes and ears and mouth because Gigante wanted a boss in Philadelphia that they could control, and he wanted into Atlantic City badly, and Bruno was unwilling to cooperate. So we have the theory that maybe Gigante was in on it. If you asked my opinion, it would make sense on a certain level, but I don't know if Gigante would have gone that far. Because it's my belief that if that were the case, he likely would have killed Funzi Thierry right after that just to keep collateral damage in check. So as a result of Bruno's murder, there would be a huge vie for power. Nicky Scarfo would have been sort of a logical successor, but it would have been overstepping Phil Testa. Gigante offered the position to Scarfo, who says, no. Testa's the right guy. He's the next in line. And Gigante then would recognize Phil Testa as the boss of Philadelphia. And what makes it interesting to me is that, Scarfo, by all nature was a money-hungry, power-grabbing fuck, and it stuns me that he didn't take the position. Why would a guy who wanted the ultimate power say, no, you know what, Phil was here first, let him take it? And I think a lot of it is because he knew there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of rumblings of another war on the street, and a hostile takeover could be coming, and he doesn't want any part of that, so he steps aside. I can't prove it, but I've always sort of believed that he knew what was going on, at least from the standpoint of gossip perspective. So Phil Testa becomes boss and wouldn't even last a year. His house and porch exploded on March 15th of 1981 due to a massive nail bomb. Like I said, Testa was gone. But we have to go back just an inch because we need to make sense of this murder. Because a lot of people don't talk about what happened. As Testa took over, he ends up naming Nicky Scarfo as a consigliere and Pete Casella his underboss. There was a guy by the name of John McCullough who was attempting to muscle in Atlantic City through the hotel and casino industry. McCullough was also tight with the K&A gang, which was basically Irish organized crime group. Many have said that Raymond Moderano ordered that murder, but he couldn't have without Testa's approval, which was likely given. So likely it came down that, listen, McCullough's creating a lot of fucking mess for us. Testa greenlights the fucking hit. So I'm not disputing any of that. But in any event, McCullough does get fucking hit. On the back end of that, you have Frank Chicky Narducci and Peter Casella, who want to take over. Narducci, who was tight with Bruno, was a captain in the crime family, controlled and handled all of Bruno's sports betting operations, end up whacking. They're the ones that are responsible for killing Philip Testa. And they did it because they wanted to take over. That's number one. But number two, the reason why they used the bomb is because they wanted to make it look like it was retaliation from the K&A gang for the murder of John McCullough. That's the reality. And it's a smart move. It's a calculating move to try to pin it on the K&A gang, which means, okay, well, they whacked Testa because it's an eye for an eye. But the problem is that Casella begins going around town saying he's the new boss, and the murder of Testa was sanctioned. Scarfo, who is either involved in this or not, I think we're going to find out that Scarfo probably knew a lot more than he ever admitted, starts to kind of feel nervous about what's going on, and he contacts Bobby Manna. And Bobby ends up sending word to the Gambinos and the Genovese crime family that Nicky Scarfo wants to meet with them. They would greenlight the meeting, and Nicky Scarfo goes to New York, and he sits down with Paul Castellano and Vinnie Gigante. They explained to Nicky Scarfo they didn't greenlight any hit, and they wanted to know who did. Scarfo literally tells them that he believes Frank Chicky Narducci and Casella are the ones who had done it. Then at that point, Castellano and Gigante specifically want the man who placed the bomb. Okay, we have the conspirators, but who is the one that placed the bomb? And Scarfo is told, here's what we want you to do. Go back to Philadelphia and you bring Casella to come see us. Scarfo ends up going to Philadelphia and he informs Casella, and they both head back to New York. Casella sits down with Castellano and Gigante with Scarfo sitting there. Casella was asked what happened. And what Casella does is he buries Frank Chicky Narducci immediately. It's all on him. It's all his fault. Casella, for his betrayal, ends up getting shelved and told to go to Florida and never ever return to Philadelphia again or get involved in criminality. Narducci, on the other hand, was sentenced to death immediately. It was then that Gigante anoints Nicky Scarfo the new boss of the Philadelphia Mafia. And in return, and this is very important, in return for getting promoted to boss, what does Nicky Scarfo do? He allows the Genovese crime family and the Gambino crime family into Atlantic City, something that Bruno had been unwilling to do. So do you see my back scratches your back kind of a deal here? That's what leads me to speculate that Vincent Gigante might have been playing both sides. We certainly know that Funzi Thierry played, and we also know that Gigante and Thierry were very, very, very close. So it's not too hard to imagine that Vinnie Gigante played Thierry and everybody against each other, knowing what they would do, manipulating them to the point where there was murder, and then saying, okay, we'll just kill the conspirators and we'll put in who we want to run things, and we'll get into Atlantic City, which is what they want. That's what leads me to sort of believe that there was a lot more tongue-in-cheek going on there, to be honest with you. But what's very interesting, and it's worth mentioning, that once Scarfo takes over, he names Joey Merlino's father, Chucky Merlino, his underboss, and Frank Monte his consigliere. I think the reality that Casella wasn't responsible for Testa's murder is a fucking joke. I'm not going to politic here, but I'm also not going to hold Philip is his son, Frank Narducci, solely responsible for that. Was it the wrong thing to do? Yeah, probably. But the reality is Casella had a higher position in the crime family, and he's the one that should have been killed because Narducci doesn't do anything without Casella. He can't. So for whatever reason, he buries Narducci, which is a weak fucking thing to do. And he was merely just trying to save his own goddamn life. But he was very much in on it, and he precipitated it because he naturally would have been the one that was elevated because he was a higher rank. In either case, Narducci did what he felt he had to do, and he paid for it in the end, as Salvi Testa would put 10 shots into him, killing him as a response to his father being killed. Not long after taking over the Philadelphia Mafia, bloodletting would begin with Scarfo. So in late 1981, Lombardo ends up retiring from the Mafia, and Vincent would name Tony Salerno his front boss. Tony Salerno, probably one of the wealthiest mobsters in the history of the Mafia, likely one of the biggest earners in mob lore, got his start with Lucky Luciano, and more specifically, once again, the 116th Street Crew. They were known as the Uptown Crew. Salerno came up under Trigger Mike Coppola in the 1930s. Salerno was a hell of an earner, and he expanded the family into gambling and loan sharking. When Coppola ends up going to prison in the 1960s for the tax evasion thing we talked about, Coppola ends up getting demoted in rank, and his crew ends up getting split up. And that move allowed his top aides to take over different portions of the rackets, which included the multi-million-dollar numbers racket. And Salerno, along with his brother Sereno, would end up this is tough to say this 8 times, Sereno Salerno, would end up taking over the Italian Harlem section and the Bronx. The brothers would oversee a multi-million-dollar gambling racket based in East Harlem, which would expand through the South Bronx. Salerno would then take over gambling and bring dice games to the area, which brought in millions and millions of dollars. When the neighborhood became gentrified, and the Italians began to move out and the African Americans began to move in, Salerno remained in complete control and had over 200 people working actively involved in his rackets. And he would never leave Harlem. He would then continue to rise within the ranks and would become consigliere in 1972, underboss in 75, and then acting boss in 1981. So as the Genovese crime family begins to move into construction, this was pre-Concrete Club. The Genovese crime family wanted control of the new convention center that was being built on the border of Hell's Kitchen, which would be called the Javits Center. And Salerno wanted control of that. He wanted a kickback, as it was a multi-million-dollar project that he could get money from. The problem was Irish mob boss Mickey Spillane, who loathed the Italians, was refusing to do business with them because he saw that area as his turf. Salerno attempts to really bargain with him, but Spillane refuses to. And it sets off a series of multiple high-profile murders, which would end Spillane's run and would elevate Jimmy Coonan to the head of the Irish mob in the city. But we're going to cover that more when we talk about the Gambino crime family. Salerno wasn't one to accept reprisals. He didn't like the word no. And he sanctioned the murder of Spillane, even hiring outside help to begin the war by contracting Mad Dog Sullivan to clip Spillane soldiers Thomas Devaney, Eddie Comiskey, and Tom Capitos. As we said earlier, Salerno controlled most of the most profitable numbers racket in New York. It was pulling in $50 million a year alone just from that racket. His bookmaking and loan sharking racket was pulling in over $2 million a year. And in 1978, he would be pinched and convicted for bookmaking and would do 6 months in federal prison. So Vincent Gigante, through Salerno, would move the family into move them into such a huge position financially. They would become a juggernaut financially. He would oversee massive bookmaking operations. Loan sharking would move into the garbage hauling operations, the unions, the shipping companies, controlled the Fulton Fish Market, the Teamsters unions, protection rackets, and more. Gigante even took over control of the Feast of St. Gennaro, and he would have dice games, card games, and every merchant that took place in the San Gennaro Fest was kicking back to Vincent Gigante. So he took what they owned and just multiplied it by 5. Just absolutely ingenious. From 1978 to 1990, 4 of the crime families of New York, including the Genovese crime family, rigged bids for 75% of $191 million, or about $142 million of the window contracts awarded by the New York City Housing Authority. Installation companies were required to make union payoffs between $1 and $2 for each window installed. But it wasn't just the windows. It was also the concrete that was skyrocketing in price. It was through Colombo labor racketeer wizard Ralph Scopo that the mob was about to embark on a massive kickback for concrete construction in the city. And we know what that is, and that is the Concrete Club. Scopo was the president of the Cement and Concrete Workers District Council of the LIU of North America from 77 to 85. During this time, Scopo used his position to extort money from cement contractors in New York in return for large construction contracts and labor peace. Contracts between $2 and $15 million were reserved for a club of contractors called the Concrete Club. So that means if it was $1 million, they didn't fuck with it. If it was over $15 million, they didn't split it. And the Concrete Club was selected by the commission. In return, the contractors gave a 2% kickback of the contract value to the commission. I've heard it's bigger than that. I heard it was more like 6%, to just be honest with you. Although Scopo was a low-ranking mafia soldier, his membership in the Concrete Club allowed him more influence than a lot of captains in the Colombo crime family. They just didn't piece any building. They didn't take a piece of just any building being built. They controlled the unions, then shook down the suppliers supplying the concrete. It was a billion-dollar enterprise, but there would be problems on the horizon for the Genovese crime family as the commission case was coming, and John Gotti would have Paul Castellano clipped. And we know Gaspipe Casso was hell-bent on killing everybody. So, next week, we get to part 6 of the Genovese crime family. We are going to talk about Gas Pipe Casso. We're going to talk about John Gotti and the hit on Castellano, because all of these things intermingle with Vinnie Gigante and what he was trying to accomplish. A lot of people have blamed Vinnie Gigante for Frankie DeChico, and they say he was hell-bent on killing Gotti. But in reality, it was Gas Pipe Casso who had the beef and was going to do whatever he wanted. And all Vinnie the Chin Gigante did was shut his fucking eyes to it and say, do whatever you got to do. We are going to talk about Vinnie Gigante's even more of a rise and the epic fall. Because the nut act that Vinnie Gigante would play lasted for 30-some years. And it's only after the feds told him, we'll throw your whole entire family, your kids, your wives, whatever the fuck in prison, whatever we got to do. And that's the only reason why Vinnie Gigante ever gave in to the feds. Now, people will say, well, it sounds like Vinnie Gigante is your favorite mob boss all the time. Well, he's one of my tops because he was smart. A lot of people, no, Frank, I'm not busting your balls, because my buddy Frankie in Cali is going to be like, oh, here he is picking on me again. Because a lot of people make fun of Vinnie the Chin. Oh, how could he fucking act like I pissed himself, pulled his dick out, pissed on the street, acted crazy. Gotti lasted 5 years. Gigante 30. Who was smarter? Who was wealthier? You know, that's just the point. Gigante, for anything anybody's going to say, I'm not comparing Gotti to Gigante whatsoever. But for anybody that wants that continues to tell me, oh, Gotti was the shit, Gotti was the best, 5 years. 5 fucking years. 30 years for Gigante. 30 years for Patriarcha. Something to be said for that. So, next week on Mob Talk Radio, we are going to close out the Genovese Crime Family with episode 6. We're going to do more Q&A stuff and a whole bunch of other stuff. So,